The coronavirus pandemic that we all find ourselves in the midst of now is perhaps, for most of us, I would imagine, the most significant aspect of our current situation, certainly the biggest change that's happened for many of us in the immediate period of our lives in which we live. And so I want to speak on this video about how to embrace the situation, to work with the reality of our individual and world situation and bring it into our spiritual path. How do we view a situation like this with regard to our individual practice? Certainly there's ways that we can be of service, even if only in a subtle, subjective and energetic way, sometimes in other ways as well. But it's also an opportunity. It's also a situation in which we're, for many of us, the world situation will bring up issues that we, fears and concerns, even doubts or despair, various kinds of reactions of a variety of types will be stirred up by this situation. One of the most basic principles that I think it's important to keep reminding ourselves of is that there's really, in a sense, two aspects to the spiritual life. One is a kind of internal dimension of our spirituality that has to do with our focus on the quality of our consciousness, the quality of our presence, quality of our relationships, and bringing as much wisdom and clarity to the moment and to both our inner practices and our day-to-day life. And so that's, in a sense, a kind of internal aspect of the essence of and the quality of our presence and relationship that we're cultivating through our spiritual practice. And the other aspect of the path is the environment, the situation that we find ourselves in. What is the nature of the road that we're traveling down on our spiritual journey? The scenery, the situations, the conditions, and these are not only external in the sense of, our life situation, our work, the conditions of our relationships, and the world situation at large, the economy, all kinds of things that can affect us, social conditions, and so on. But in a certain inner sense too, even our own personalities, our psychological and physical state is still kind of exterior to our innermost nature, our consciousness, our soul. So even that is part of our environment, you might say, that what kinds of emotional conditions are we experiencing? How is the state of our body, the health of our body, and so on. So there's a kind of internal and external aspect to our environment that's part of our journey. Where do we find ourselves? And part of the central significance of this latter, the second condition or aspect of the path, our environment it's the context in which our practice unfolds. It's a place where we're challenged, where we have opportunities, where we're kind of tested to bring forth, to integrate those principles and qualities that we're cultivating in our spiritual practice. So certainly, as people, for instance, a large number of spiritual practitioners in the world today are not renunciates. They're certainly not, kind of withdrawing from life in the sense of living in a cave or as a hermit somewhere in the forest, or they're more often we're we're engaged in our day-to-day lives. We have jobs or involved in relationships with at least family, friends, co-workers, and so on. So all of this is part of the material of our spiritual path. We need to learn to integrate our spiritual practice into that context. And challenges inevitably come up, both our individual karma and the karma of the world situation provide part of that, the conditions that give rise to, like, what is our situation? What is the relationship of our finances or our work or our relationships? Do we have children? How are those relationships going? To our neighbors, to the world around us, the economy, the environmental issues? All of this, in a sense, reflects both individual and personal karmic conditions that we find ourselves in. And so that's an important part of the path too. That's kind of the environment that we're working out our path. It's sort of offering us lessons and opportunities to cultivate our practice, and can bring out different sort of demands, different responses, cultivating different kinds of wisdom. So in that context, this pandemic that's arisen in the world in the last few months is, for some of us, a kind of unique situation in that it's a kind of collective challenge that's suddenly upon us and presents a kind of challenging opportunity in a number of different ways, and some of which will vary from one person to the next. But ultimately, it's also the same as that general principle, in that our path is always one in which there are conditions arising. We want to bring forth the same basic attitude of, in a sense, rather than viewing any of these things, whether they're the small little issues in life that arise, annoyances and challenges and missed opportunities or disappointments, and positive conditions that arise, the ups and downs of day-to-day life on a small scale, also larger things that arise, also are part of our path. And we want to bring a general spirit of embracing those, in the sense of saying, this too is part of my, in a sense, my spiritual curriculum. This is what's on the table for me right now to be with. It's part of my education to both cultivate internal practices, but also to integrate my spiritual presence, qualities, and principles with day-to-day life and the karmic conditions and situation of my personal life and the world around me. So part of that attitude is one of trying to have a certain amount of acceptance, a certain amount of surrender, you might say, to the conditions of our lives. This doesn't mean to become passive and not work for change, such as in this instance. Many people will be in situations where they'll be called in different ways to try to help in the world situation. And that's certainly an important part of the path. We might say there's sort of active ways that we can respond to the situation, including serviceful ways. But there's also that aspect of the path that speaks more to our most immediate situation, the basic quality of just being with our lives. The key quality there that's so fundamental to our own awakening, our own freedom, our own process of deepening into self-realization, is the challenge we face to accept our life conditions, to make our peace with what's happening in our personal lives and in the world in general, and to find a way to balance making an active contribution in ways that make sense for us individually, to make changes in our personal lives, make changes in our character, make changes, if we can, in the world around us, to make a contribution to be active in those ways. But also a key part of our spiritual development is the depth of our ability to, at the same time, balance that active nature with a deepening sense of just being with life, accepting life on its own terms, and even somewhat more positively embracing and appreciating opportunities that arise as part of our opportunity to grow, as conditions that serve our evolution and collective evolution, rather than that, the natural human tendency to be frustrated or be to complain, to be irritated. And this is very difficult. The more painful, the more tragic, the more sorrow and loss and other kinds of challenge that arise, and especially in large, challenging situations, depressions, world wars, any kind of war and conflict of that sort, the injustices we see. It's difficult to accept these things. So there's a great challenge in that, and we're not going to accomplish this challenge to surrender to just being with life in this way, very gracefully, very effortlessly. It's going to be an ongoing process. But it's a key part of our spiritual journey to kind of deeply open to the fullness of life, open to all of the positive and negative conditions and positive and negative feelings and states, and be willing to learn from that, to really open our hearts to that. And a key component of that is sort of a courage to be with life in its fullness, and bring this deep in equanimity, a peace and a clarity of openness, and willing to feel into the situation, willing to just be present. And it seems at times that this is a contradiction to a more active mode, but they really are interwoven. They go hand in hand. I'll speak in greater length and perhaps another talk soon about this kind of balance. But for now, I want to just stress this general idea that we want to approach the world situation, this pandemic, in the same spirit as we would any of the smaller issues that would come up in our life, and try to begin with embracing both challenges, small and large, with this spirit of making that part of the path, making our ordinary lives in the world that we live in, the world situation, different events and conditions that come and go in the world, to sort of embrace all that as part of our path, rather than as something that's unfortunate and we kind of wish wasn't happening. There's a sort of paradox in our spiritual life where we cultivate both a compassionate desire to improve conditions and a complementary deep opening to the ability to accept things as they are, to make our peace with them. That's a fundamental part of our practice as well. So thank you for joining me.